The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Willow Creek's only hotel, kicking up a cloud of dust that swirled in the late afternoon sun. Wilhelmina Grant clutched her worn carpetbag tightly, her knuckles white with apprehension as she peered through the grimy window at the small Montana town that was to be her new home. The year was 1885, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, opening the door and extending a weathered hand to help her down. Wilhelmina stepped carefully onto the wooden boardwalk, her legs unsteady after the long journey from Boston. At 22, she had never ventured beyond the confines of her family's modest home until necessity had forced her hand. Her parents' deaths from influenza the previous winter had left her penniless and alone, with no prospects for a suitable marriage in a city where her family's debts had tarnished her reputation. The advertisement in the Boston Herald had seemed like divine providence. "Rancher seeks bride. Must be of good character, educated and willing to work, passage paid." Owen Vaughn had written her 3 letters, each more courteous than the last, before sending money for her ticket west. "You the mail-order bride?" The driver's question was casual, but Wilhelmina flinched at the term. "I am to be married to Mr. Owen Vaughn," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. The driver nodded, handing her the last of her modest luggage, a single trunk containing everything she owned in the world. "Best of luck to you, miss." His tone suggested she would need it. Wilhelmina glanced around, expecting to see her future husband waiting to greet her. Instead, the boardwalk was occupied only by a few curious onlookers who made little effort to disguise their scrutiny. A woman in a faded calico dress leaned close to her companion, whispering something that made the other woman's eyes widen. Summoning her courage, Wilhelmina approached them. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mr. Owen Vaughn. Do you know where I might find him?" The women exchanged glances. "Owen Vaughn's place is about 3 miles outside of town," the first woman said. "You his correspondence bride?" Wilhelmina nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, I am Wilhelmina Grant." "Well," the woman replied, her voice cool, "Mr. Vaughn isn't in town today. You best wait at the hotel. Mrs. Tolliver runs a respectable establishment." "Thank you," Wilhelmina said, turning toward the hotel. She could feel their eyes following her, could almost hear their thoughts. Mail-order bride, as if she were a parcel to be claimed, a commodity rather than a person. The hotel lobby was mercifully cool after the heat outside. A gray-haired woman looked up from behind the desk, her spectacles perched on the end of her nose. "I'm Wilhelmina Grant," she explained. "I've come to marry Mr. Owen Vaughn, but it seems he isn't in town today. I need a room for the night." Mrs. Tolliver's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flickered with something pity, perhaps. "Of course, Miss Grant. Sign the register, please." Wilhelmina did as instructed, then followed the older woman up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Dinner is served at 6, Mrs. Tolliver informed her. "The washroom is at the end of the hall." Left alone, Wilhelmina sank onto the edge of the bed, fighting back tears of exhaustion and uncertainty. What had she done? Had she made a terrible mistake in coming to this strange, dusty place to marry a man she knew only through a few polite letters? She forced herself to rise and splash water on her face from the basin provided. There was no turning back now. This was her future, and she would face it with whatever grace she could summon. Dinner in the hotel dining room proved to be an ordeal. The few other guests, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, and 2 men she took to be ranchers, stared openly when Mrs. Tolliver introduced her as Miss Grant, who's come to marry Owen Vaughn. The salesman choked slightly on his coffee. "Owen Vaughn, the hermit with the ranch up by Eagle Creek." "Mr. Vaughn is a respected rancher," Mrs. Tolliver corrected firmly. "Respected, maybe, sociable, hardly," one of the ranchers commented. "Man hasn't said more than 10 words to me in 5 years." Wilhelmina picked at her beef stew, appetite vanishing. "Does Mr. Vaughn come to town often?" The elderly woman across the table gave her a kind smile. "He comes in for supplies once a month or so. Keeps to himself, but he's honest in his dealings. Pays his bills prompt." It wasn't much reassurance, but Wilhelmina clung to it as she excused herself early and retreated to her room. The next morning, she woke to the sounds of the town coming to life. After dressing in her second-best dress, a blue cotton that had seen better days, she made her way downstairs. Mrs. Tolliver was already at her post. "I thought I would walk around town this morning," Wilhelmina said. "Perhaps Mr. Vaughn will arrive today." "That would be fine, dear, but—" The older woman hesitated. "Willow Creek is a small town. People talk. You might find it uncomfortable." "I understand," Wilhelmina replied, though she wasn't sure she did. "Thank you for your concern." Outside, the main street of Willow Creek stretched before her, lined with a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small church, and various other businesses. It was not so different from the small towns she had passed through on her journey, yet it felt alien. She had only walked a block when she noticed the stairs. Two women with market baskets stopped their conversation abruptly as she passed. A man emerging from the barber shop paused, hat in hand, looking at her with undisguised curiosity. Determined to maintain her composure, Wilhelmina entered the general store. The proprietor, a balding man with a neat mustache, greeted her pleasantly enough. "Good morning. I'm new to town. You're Owen Vaughn's bride," he interrupted. "Word travels fast here. I'm Howard Mercer." "Wilhelmina Grant," she replied. "I was hoping to purchase a few necessities." She selected a bar of lavender soap, a small bottle of rosewater, and a packet of hairpins, conscious of Mr. Mercer's scrutiny. As she paid, the bell over the door jingled and two young women entered, falling silent at the sight of her. "Good morning, Judith, Sarah," Mr. Mercer called. "This is Miss Grant. She's come to marry Owen Vaughn." The taller of the two women, Judith, presumably raised her eyebrows. "Really?" "All the way from where?" "Boston," Wilhelmina answered. "Boston? My goodness, and you've never met Mr. Vaughn?" "We've corresponded," Wilhelmina said stiffly. "How modern," Judith remarked. "I suppose when a man gets to Owen's age, he has to get creative." "And I suppose some women will marry anyone if the price is right," Sarah added, her voice sweet with malice. Wilhelmina gathered her purchases with trembling hands. "Good day, Mr. Mercer. Ladies." She nodded curtly and left, the sound of their muffled laughter following her out. The rest of her walk proved no better. At the milliner's shop, the owner barely acknowledged her. Outside the bank, a group of men fell silent as she passed, then resumed their conversation with knowing looks. By the time she reached the church, Wilhelmina felt as if every eye in Willow Creek was on her, every voice whispering about the desperate Eastern woman who had come to marry their reclusive neighbor. The church door was open, and she slipped inside, seeking refuge in the cool, dim interior. The pews were empty, but a man in clerical garb was arranging hymnals near the altar. "Hello," she called softly. The minister turned, surprise evident on his kind face. "Hello there, I don't believe we've met." "Wilhelmina Grant, sir. I arrived yesterday." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Ah, Miss Grant, I'm Reverend Thomas Jenkins. I understand you're to marry Owen Vaughn." "Yes, sir, though I'm beginning to wonder if Mr. Vaughn has forgotten our arrangement." She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. Reverend Jenkins approached, his expression sympathetic. "Owen Vaughn is a man of his word, Miss Grant. If he said he would marry you, he will. He's probably just delayed by ranch business." "Do you know him well?" The minister considered his answer. "I know him well enough to say he is a decent man. Quiet, yes, reserved, certainly, but decent." "The people in town seem to have a different opinion." Reverend Jenkins sighed. "Small towns can be hard on those who don't conform. Owen keeps to himself, which makes him an object of curiosity and sometimes unkind speculation, and I'm afraid—" He hesitated. "You're afraid the same will apply to me," Wilhelmina finished for him. "His mail-order bride. People will come around, Miss Grant. They always do in time." But as Wilhelmina left the church, she wondered how much time it would take and whether she had the strength to endure the scrutiny and whispers until then. Back at the hotel, Mrs. Tolliver intercepted her in the lobby. "There's a man asking for you, Miss Grant. Says he's Owen Vaughn." Wilhelmina's heart leapt to her throat. "Where is he?" "I put him in the parlor. Said it wasn't proper for him to go up to your room." Mrs. Tolliver's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "He's right about that, at least." Smoothing her dress and touching a hand to her hair, Wilhelmina took a deep breath and entered the hotel's small parlor. A man stood by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. "Mr. Vaughn," she said softly. He turned, and Wilhelmina's first thought was that his letters had not done him justice. Owen Vaughn was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of days spent in the sun and wind. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too rugged, his jaw too square, but there was something compelling about his deep-set blue eyes and the way they studied her with quiet intensity. "Miss Grant," he said, his voice deeper than she had imagined. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with the first threads of silver at the temples. "I apologize for not being here when you arrived. One of my hands broke his leg, and I had to get him to the doctor in the next town." "I understand," Wilhelmina replied, surprised to find that she did. "Is he going to be all right?" A flicker of surprise crossed Owen's face. "Yes, he'll mend. Thank you for asking." He cleared his throat. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 22, she said, lifting her chin slightly, "and you're older than I expected." 34, he admitted. "Does that trouble you?" "No," she answered honestly. The age difference was not unusual for marriages of convenience, and he seemed vigorous and healthy. An awkward silence fell between them. Owen shifted his weight, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the formal setting of the parlor. "I thought perhaps we might talk over dinner," Wilhelmina suggested. "Get to know each other a bit before we marry," Owen finished for her. He nodded. "That seems sensible. There's a decent place down the street, not fancy, but the food's good." They walked side by side down the hotel's front steps and onto the boardwalk, not touching but close enough that Wilhelmina could sense his presence, solid and strangely reassuring despite his being a virtual stranger. The decent place turned out to be a small restaurant attached to the baker's shop. As they entered, the hum of conversation dipped noticeably, and Wilhelmina was acutely aware of the stares directed their way. Owen seemed not to notice, or perhaps he was simply accustomed to being an object of curiosity. He led her to a corner table, waiting until she was seated before taking his own chair. A plump, middle-aged waitress approached, her expression curious. "Owen Vaughn, twice in 1 month. Must be a special occasion." "Evening, Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Wilhelmina Grant." He hesitated before adding, "My fiancée." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows shot up. "Is that so? Well, congratulations to you both. What can I get you?" They ordered roast chicken for Wilhelmina, beefsteak for Owen, and found themselves alone again, the weight of expectation hanging between them. "Your letters didn't mention you had such a large ranch," Wilhelmina began. 3,000 acres, Owen replied. "Not as big as some, but it's good land. Mostly cattle, but I keep some horses too." "And you manage it alone?" "I have 2 hands, 3 usually, but Jim's laid up with that broken leg. They have a bunkhouse behind the main house." "And the main house, is it comfortable?" Owen met her gaze directly. "It's plain but solid. 4 rooms downstairs, 2 up. I built it myself. There's a good kitchen, a sitting room with a fireplace, my office, and a bedroom downstairs. Upstairs there are 2 more bedrooms. I've been using one for storage." He paused. "I cleared it out for you or for us if you prefer. Either way." Wilhelmina felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication. "I see. Miss Grant, I want to be clear about something." Owen leaned forward slightly. "I advertised for a wife because I need help running the household, cooking, cleaning, mending women's work that I'm not much good at. But I don't expect." He stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "What I mean is, this marriage can be whatever you want it to be. I won't press you for more than you're willing to give." His frankness should have scandalized her, but instead, Wilhelmina found it refreshing after the sidelong glances and whispered comments she'd endured all day. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Vaughn. I appreciate knowing where we stand, Mrs. Peterson." Returned with their meals, and they ate in relative silence, each stealing glances at the other when they thought themselves unobserved. Wilhelmina noted the careful way Owen handled his cutlery, belying his rough appearance. Owen found himself watching the graceful movements of Wilhelmina's hands as she cut her chicken into neat pieces. "Tell me about Boston," Owen said eventually. "Your letters mentioned you taught school there." "Yes, at a small private academy for girls. I taught literature and history." Wilhelmina smiled, remembering. "I enjoyed it very much." You must find Willow Creek quite different. It's an adjustment, she admitted. Owen's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. That's a polite way of putting it. Their dinner was interrupted by the arrival of 3 men at their table, all of them regarding Owen with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Evening Vaughn, the tallest of the 3, said, his tone just shy of mocking. Aren't you going to introduce us to your bride? Owen's face hardened, but his voice remained level. Miss Grant, this is Eric Townsend, Frank Miller, and George Dawson. Gentlemen, Miss Wilhelmina Grant. Pleased to meet you, Miss Grant, Townsend drawled. Tell me, how does a refined lady like yourself end up agreeing to marry our local hermit? Wilhelmina felt Owen tense beside her. Mr. Vaughn and I have corresponded extensively, she replied coolly. I find him to be a man of integrity and intelligence. Miller snorted. Integrity maybe, but Vaughn here hardly speaks 10 words a month, must have been some letters. Quality over quantity, Mr. Miller, Wilhelmina said, forcing a smile. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were enjoying our dinner. The men exchanged glances but didn't move. You sure you know what you're getting into, miss? Dawson asked. Vaughn's place is pretty isolated, no neighbors for miles. No society, just cattle and sagebrush. And peace and quiet, Owen interjected, his patience clearly wearing thin, something in short supply at the moment. We're just looking out for the lady, Townsend said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Wouldn't want her to be disappointed when she sees what frontier life is really like. Wilhelmina had had enough. Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern, misplaced though it is. I came west with my eyes open, fully aware that life here would be different from what I knew in Boston. Now, please allow us to finish our meal in peace. Reluctantly, the men moved away, but not before Townsend leaned down to murmur, If you change your mind about marrying the hermit, my door's always open. Owen half rose from his chair, but Wilhelmina placed a restraining hand on his arm. It's not worth it, she said softly. He subsided, but his expression remained thunderous. I apologize for that. Townsend's had it in for me since I outbid him on some land 5 years ago. It seems I'm not the only one subject to the town's judgment, Wilhelmina observed. Owen shrugged. I don't care what they think of me, but I don't like them disrespecting you. The rest of their meal passed in strained conversation, both of them aware of the covert glances from other diners. When they finished, Owen paid the bill and they stepped out into the early evening air. I'll walk you back to the hotel, he said. I have some business to finish up tonight, but I'll come for you tomorrow morning. We can be married by Reverend Jenkins if that suits you, and then head out to the ranch. Wilhelmina nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what she was about to do. Tomorrow she would marry this man, this stranger who was somehow both exactly as she had imagined from his letters, and completely different. Mr. Vaughn, she began, then stopped, unsure how to express her doubts without causing offense. Having second thoughts, he asked quietly, I wouldn't blame you if you were. No, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it, but I am nervous. So am I, Owen admitted, the confession clearly costing him something. I've lived alone a long time, Miss Grant. I'm not used to having someone else to consider, and I'm not used to being so far from everything familiar. She hesitated, but I made my choice when I boarded that train in Boston. I'm not one to go back on my word. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Neither am I. They had reached the hotel. Owen removed his hat again, holding it awkwardly in his hands. Until tomorrow, then. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, Wilhelmina confirmed. She watched him walk away, his stride long and confident, his back straight. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did she turn to enter the hotel, almost colliding with Judith and Sarah from the general store. Well, well, Judith said, her eyes gleaming with malicious interest. If it isn't Mrs. Vaughn to be. Wilhelmina tried to step around them, but Sarah blocked her path. We saw you having dinner with your hermit. Did he manage more than 2 words together? Mr. Vaughn is a perfectly adequate conversationalist, Wilhelmina replied, striving for dignity. Is that what you're marrying him for? His conversation? Judith laughed. Or is it his ranch? 3,000 acres is a lot for a man with no family to inherit. The implication stung all the more because Wilhelmina had indeed considered the security Owen's property represented. But there was more to her decision than that. His letters had revealed a thoughtful, intelligent man, and their dinner conversation, limited though it had been, had confirmed that impression. "I'm marrying Mr. Vaughn because I respect him," she said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, respect." Sarah scoffed. "Is that what they call it back east? Out here, we call women who marry for money something else entirely." Wilhelmina felt as if she'd been slapped. "How dare you, ladies?" Mrs. Tolliver's voice cut through the confrontation. "This is a respectable establishment. Take your gossip elsewhere." The two younger women retreated, but not before Judith delivered a parting shot. "Enjoy your wedding night with the hermit. Hope it's worth the price." Humiliated, Wilhelmina hurried upstairs to her room, where she finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back all day to fall. What had she expected? That she would arrive in this tiny frontier town and be welcomed with open arms. That no one would question her motives in coming so far to marry a man she'd never met. Still, the unkindness cut deep. She had never experienced such direct hostility before, had never been the subject of such open speculation and judgment. Morning came too soon. Wilhelmina, dressed with care in her best gown, a dove-gray silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slimmer frame. She arranged her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, securing it with her mother's pearl hairpins. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand was pale but composed. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mrs. Tolliver knocked on her door. "Mr. Vaughn is here, Miss Grant." Wilhelmina descended the stairs, her small carpetbag in one hand. Owen waited in the lobby, dressed in a clean black coat that sat somewhat stiffly on his shoulders, as if he were unaccustomed to such formal attire. He held a hat in his hands, not his usual wide-brimmed one, but a more formal bowler. "Miss Grant," he said, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look very nice." "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn, so do you." He seemed about to say something else, but then simply offered his arm. "Shall we?" The church was only a short walk away. As they made their way down Main Street, Wilhelmina was acutely conscious of the stares and whispers that followed them. A small crowd had gathered outside the mercantile, including Judith and Sarah, who watched with undisguised curiosity. "Mail-order bride," someone murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "Poor thing marrying that recluse," another voice added. Owen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed straight ahead. They were nearly at the church when Townsend stepped directly into their path, flanked by his friends from the previous evening. "Morning, Vaughn," he said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "Big day for you." "Townsend," Owen acknowledged stiffly. "If you'll excuse us, Reverend Jenkins is waiting." "Not so fast." Townsend moved to block them again. "I was just telling the boys how interesting it is that a man who barely speaks to his neighbors managed to convince a proper Boston lady to marry him sight unseen." He turned his attention to Wilhelmina. "What did he promise you, Miss Grant?" "A life of luxury on his big ranch, or just enough money to escape whatever trouble you left behind in Boston." Wilhelmina felt Owen's arm tense under her hand. "Mr. Townsend, your insinuations are as unwelcome as they are incorrect. Now please step aside." "Or maybe," Townsend continued as if she hadn't spoken, "you're just desperate. No decent man back east would have you, so you had to settle for a mail-order arrangement with Willow Creek's resident hermit." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Wilhelmina could feel their eyes on her, curious and judgmental. Shame burned through her, not because there was truth in Townsend's words, but because she had allowed herself to hope for acceptance in this place. "That's enough, Townsend." Owen's voice was low and dangerous. "Apologize to Miss Grant. Or what? You'll finally break that silent streak of yours and say 2 sentences in a row." Owen's free hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, Wilhelmina thought he might strike the other man. Instead, he surprised her by turning to face her directly, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Miss Grant, Wilhelmina, I should have done this yesterday, but I was too caught up in my own awkwardness." Without breaking eye contact, he reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "I'm proud that you agreed to be my wife. I'm proud to walk beside you today and every day hereafter." The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. This was not the reserved man from dinner, careful with his words and guarded with his emotions. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married in an hour, you should call me Owen." "Owen," she repeated, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed his solemn face. Still holding her hand, he turned back to Townsend. "Get out of our way." Something in Owen's tone or expression must have conveyed his determination, because Townsend stepped aside, his momentary confusion giving way to a sneer. "Enjoy your mail-order bride, Vaughn. Hope she's worth the price." The crowd parted as Owen led Wilhelmina forward, her hand still clasped firmly in his. Head high, he walked her proudly down Main Street toward the church, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly when they were out of earshot of the crowd. "I should have warned you about Townsend and his kind, small minds in a small town." "It's not your fault," Wilhelmina replied, surprised to find that her initial humiliation had been replaced by a strange sense of pride. Owen Vaughn might be a man of few words, but when he did speak, he spoke with conviction. And he had just defended her not with his fists, as she had half feared, but with a simple, powerful declaration of pride in their impending union. Reverend Jenkins was waiting on the church steps, his expression concerned as he noted their flushed faces. "Everything all right, fine, Reverend," Owen assured him, just eager to get on with the ceremony. The church was empty save for Mrs. Tolliver, who had slipped in to serve as a witness, and a lean, weathered man Owen introduced as Patrick Riley, his foreman. "Patrick's been with me since I bought the ranch," Owen explained. "Wanted to be here today." The ceremony was brief but dignified. Reverend Jenkins spoke of the sacred bond of marriage, of commitment and sacrifice, of building a life together. Wilhelmina found herself moved by the simple beauty of the traditional words, and when Owen placed a plain gold band on her finger, "It was my mother's," he murmured she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Jenkins concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Owen hesitated, then leaned down to press a gentle, chaste kiss to Wilhelmina's lips. It was over in a moment, but the warmth of his touch lingered. "Congratulations, Mrs. Vaughn," Mrs. Tolliver said, coming forward to clasp Wilhelmina's hands. "I wish you both every happiness." "Thank you for your kindness," Wilhelmina replied sincerely. The older woman had been one of the few people in Willow Creek to treat her with respect from the beginning. Patrick Riley shook Owen's hand vigorously, then turned to Wilhelmina with a shy smile. "Welcome to the family, madam. Boss is a good man, you won't regret it." Outside, Owen's wagon waited, her trunk already loaded in the back. He helped her up onto the seat, then took his place beside her, gathering the reins. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked. "Yes," Wilhelmina said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the same man who had just stood proudly beside her, defending her honor with quiet dignity. As they drove down Main Street, heads turned to watch their departure. Townsend and his friends were still loitering outside the general store, their expressions sour. But this time, Wilhelmina felt no shame under their scrutiny. Owen seemed to sense her thoughts. Without a word, he reached over and took her hand, holding it openly as they passed the gathered townspeople. The gesture was clear. This was his wife, and he was proud to claim her. They left Willow Creek behind, the wagon following a well-traveled trail that wound through rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scattered pines. The late morning sun was warm on their faces, and a light breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and distant rain. "It's beautiful country," Wilhelmina observed, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "It is," Owen agreed. "Harsh sometimes, but beautiful, like a lot of things worth having." They crested a hill, and suddenly the valley spread out before them, a sweep of green pasture cradled by rocky ridges, with a meandering creek cutting through the center. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark dots against the landscape, and near the creek stood a substantial log house with a wide porch, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "Welcome to Eagle Creek Ranch," Owen said, a note of pride in his deep voice. "Welcome home, Wilhelmina." The word home resonated in her heart with unexpected force. She had left behind the only home she had ever known, had traveled across a continent to marry a stranger, had endured the judgment and scorn of an entire town. Yet somehow, looking down at the peaceful valley, at the solid house Owen had built with his own hands, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. "Thank you, Owen," she said softly, turning to meet his gaze, "for bringing me home." His eyes, so blue against his sun-darkened face, searched hers, as if looking for uncertainty or regret. Finding none, he smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious features and made him look years younger. "I should be thanking you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For being brave enough to come all this way, for standing tall against Townsend and his ilk, for saying yes." Without thinking, Wilhelmina leaned across the small space between them and pressed her lips to his, a brief, sweet kiss that held promise rather than passion. When she drew back, Owen looked stunned, then pleased. "What was that for?" he asked. "For walking me proudly down Main Street," she answered simply. "For seeing me as more than just a mail-order bride." Owen's hand tightened around hers. "You're Wilhelmina Vaughn now," he said, the name rolling off his tongue like a vow. "My wife, and anyone who has a problem with that will answer to me." Together they drove down into the valley, toward the house that waited to become their home, leaving behind the whispers and judgment of Willow Creek. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make, a relationship to build, a life to create together. But as the wagon rolled up to the porch of their new home, Wilhelmina felt a surge of hope. This strange, quiet man with the kind eyes and strong hands had surprised her once today. Perhaps life as Mrs. Owen Vaughn would hold many more such surprises, moments of unexpected connection, of shared purpose, of growing affection. Perhaps in time, what had begun as a practical arrangement might become something more. As Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hands gentle at her waist, Wilhelmina knew one thing with certainty. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, with the same quiet dignity and pride with which they had walked down Main Street that morning, not as mail-order bride and reclusive rancher, but as husband and wife.